Hi everyone, welcome to a very special episode of the Highlights from Ukraine. You know, we've been doing the podcast for about a year now, and as our format is designed to give you only the most important news, we feel that on some topics more in-depth discussion is needed. And this is exactly what we are going to do. In a new segment called Long Talk, we discuss different topics in and around Ukraine with invited guests, from experts to eyewitnesses and ordinary Ukrainians who lived through the war. As we approach the first anniversary of the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, more experts refer to this war as the war of attrition, meaning not only military resources, but also economies of the two states. We invited Ivan Trotsenko today. Ivan is an analyst of international trade and politics, graduate of London Business School, and exactly the person to talk to about the details of Ukraine's war economy. Welcome to the podcast, Ivan.
Thank you for having me.
So, Ivan, let's go way back to the beginning of this full-scale invasion. What the state of Ukraine's economy was before the Russian invasion started on 24th of 2022? Were there any noticeable trends?
Well, we did have our ups and downs, to be honest with you. If we talk about the positive things that were happening to the Ukrainian economy, first of all, our economy was growing. The GDP growth for 2021 was just over 3%, which was a good recovery from COVID pandemics. The government has just launched its extensive business financing program, 579 interest rates. And the government has just launched the new agricultural land market. We had a stable currency at the time. We had a healthy current account deficit of less than 1% GDP. Well, first of all, thanks to the remittances from our workers who are residing abroad. And we also had a renewed cooperation with the IMF. So inflation was quite moderate compared to where it is now, at only 10%. It's about the NBU target of 5% per annum, but it was forecasted to slow down to 7%. So we were on the right trajectory. Official unemployment was at 9.8%, but it was due to the market imbalances and the local COVID sparks in certain regions. So nothing tremendously awful there. Also, we had a very steady growth of base sectors of our economy, such as agriculture, where we had a record harvest in 2021. Then meat production, so our exports of poultry peaked in 2021. And overall, we were quite successful in transitioning from this post-socialist market to the new market-based environment.
From what you are saying, basically, it looks like everything was going pretty good for Ukraine.
Not everything. We did have our downs. One of the most significant challenges that we faced, it was demographic crisis or brain drain. If you look at the official statistics on the government's website for the natural decline of population in last year, we lost 442,280 people. So that's births minus deaths. But that doesn't include migration. So if you want to account for migration, double that number. So just under 1 million people, Ukraine lost in 2021. That's significant. That's huge.
That sounds really, really a bit depressing, I should say.
It is. We also were suffering from low rate of foreign direct investments. It was pretty negligible when compared to other European countries. And that was primarily because of our law and justice systems that were not mature enough.
From what I understand, basically, Ukraine had some problems with the economy, like you said, brain drain and some issues with economic system. But in general, we were going, on a positive way. So we still had some strengths on which we based basically our economic growth, which we had in 2021. So now we understand how it was before the full-scale invasion and what the full-scale invasion basically changed.
Oh, it changed very dramatically. So instead of moderate growth of 3.4% that was forecasted for this year, we had the GDP falling by 32%, and that's just the official figures. So the reality could be much harsher than the official numbers. The 2023 state budget for that was issued by the Ukrainian authorities for this year actually predicts that we'll have a moderate growth next year, so in 2023 of about 4%. But given the fact that we are starting from a very low base and the Russians continue to target the electricity infrastructure, I doubt that we will hit even 4%.
With this like 1/3 of economy drop in 2022, so we start like let's say directly, we start from the bottom, and even still like 4% from this super low level is not something that you envisage that we will be able to reach.
Absolutely, but the good news is that we hopefully reach the bottom. So the economy, we don't expect the economy to fall even further next year. The wide expectation is that either the economy will sustain itself or it will grow modestly. And that is already good news.
Okay, so we should not expect like any tremendous falls in this year at least, right?
No.
Okay, that's on the, let's say, macroeconomic level. What's about ordinary people? So how the war affected them economically speaking?
Well, overall, it's not great. So, if I were to sum it up, I would call it as a sharp decline in standards of living. Why? Well, first of all, we have record high unemployment in the country. Official statistics says 28% of people are currently unemployed, but I reckon the percentage should be a little bit higher. Overall, according to the government numbers, we have 5 million people who are considered to be unemployed, who don't have a steady income. Coupled with the fact that the inflation is 30% for this year, many people are just about managing to pay their bills and to find their means for living.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, there is assistance available, financial assistance available from the government to those people who lost their jobs. And the international agencies such as UN also provide some monetary support. But the aid doesn't reach everyone, and it's not substantial enough. On top of that, you have internally displaced people. That is 6.5 million people who are forced to leave their homes and relocate to other parts of the country. They don't have their roof. They need to find a new roof above their head. They need to pay bills. They need to sustain their living. They need to buy food. So that's extra expenses. And when you travel somewhere, when you go to other places, there are actually you take lots of stuff with you, but there are actually some expenses that you will have to make. For example, let's say you forget your toothpaste, you'll have to go and buy it.
Yeah.
So here it will be something similar. You can't take everything with you, so you'll have to buy the new stuff. Plus, we have extensive mobilization. A lot of men have been conscripted into the workforce. However, there is another side of the coin here, because the army offers really high remuneration package for the soldiers. Many local authorities have reported increase in their revenues. Why? Because 75% of the personal income tax for citizens is left within the local authorities' budgets. It doesn't go to the central budget as a result of the decentralization reform that we've done in 2016. So many local authorities do find themselves with a bit more cash, and they're able to spend this cash to support the communities and to support the people who were displaced. Also, we had shortage of medicines at the beginning of the invasion, but that was mainly because of the logistical problems, and those problems were quickly resolved by the government intervention. So now, mostly, if you need any medicine, you can access your medicine in the country.
Is there any expectation that people who left Ukraine as refugees, especially those who were part of the workforce in Ukraine before, that they will be coming back like this year, even before the war ended?
Well, that's a difficult question. If we look at the numbers, so since the start of the invasion, overall 13 million Ukrainians left the country in 2022. But out of those 13 millions, just over 8 million have returned. So the UN says that there are still about 5 million Ukrainians residing abroad, and they are not planning to return to Ukraine this year or until the war finishes at the very least. So yes, that is significant. That is significant number.
Incredible number, to be honest, for a country of, I believe, Ukraine before the war, before the full-fledged war was, 38, 39 million people. So 5 million out of that.
Yeah, well, it is difficult to say how many of them will return. There have been a number of social studies conducted. People have been asked when are you planning to return or whether you are planning to return at all. Different numbers came out of those studies. Some say 50% planning to return, some say 75% planning to return. I wouldn't jump on those numbers and use them for any forecasts or for the purpose of this discussion at all. I would say that there is a great danger that qualified workforce will not return. And that is now a question to the government, how it plans to attract the workforce back.
So you mean basically that people who like good in their jobs, who have the experience, who have probably the knowledge of, I believe, foreign languages, they will basically find employment outside of Ukraine and will have no reason whatsoever to return because they will build their lives outside, right?
Well, the bad news for the government is that they already have found jobs in other countries. They already have good jobs. They already have stable employment. They are highly skilled, and they are already integrating into the new societies. The other people who were less lucky, who weren't able to integrate into the new societies, eventually they will have to return. But the GDP contribution of these people would be lower than the GDP contribution that those people who stayed could be.
Enjoy early access and extended versions of Long Talk interviews on our Patreon by following the link in the description to this episode. Plus, this is the easiest way to support us.
Recently, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, said that the damage caused to the Ukrainian economy as a result of the war exceeds $700 billion. So there are many other estimates done in different times by different state organizations, Ukrainian International, or NGOs as well, some think tanks, so different numbers are flying around. My question would not be about that, don't worry, but my question would be when is it appropriate to conduct a loss assessment? So when can we start to sum up what Ukraine lost in terms of economy from this full-scale invasion?
Yeah, well, so as you have correctly mentioned, there are plenty of estimates flying around. Some of them are tens of billions, others hundreds of billions, so very large.
Sometimes it looks like people are just throwing numbers, who throws the higher mark.
It's true, absolutely. The bottom line is that the damage that has been done to Ukraine by this invasion is indeed measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. But it's difficult to estimate, and there is no point in estimating now because damages are being done every day. On top of the physical damage, you can also add moral damages to the citizens, to the people, and damages to the environment. So while the bombs fly, while the fighting goes on, no money will come. So I don't see much point in trying to get as accurate number for the damages as possible. But it is really important, while the war is continuing, it is really important to record every instance of the damage as it happens. So by calculating the total number of damages, then we will be able to arrive at the number that we will demand from the Russians as compensation. So some of the agencies have been doing just that. So, for example, I've seen that the Ministry of Environment of Ukraine has been very rigorous in recording what losses have been sustained by the environment of Ukraine as a result of this invasion. And so far, it has recorded almost 3,000 cases when the Russians damaged the environment. And it could be anything from burning the forest to killing the dolphins in the Black Sea using the mines. So key right now, as the war goes on, is to record the damage as rigorously as possible and keep the evidence of it. Then, after the war is finished, then there will be an exercise where you put the numbers together and come up with a total bill. That's how I think it should be done. And there have been instances in the past. For example, remember when there was a UN Compensation Commission working to determine what it will be the compensation bill that Iraq should pay for its invasion of Kuwait. So every citizen of Kuwait had a chance to submit its application for the reparations. And to be honest with you, I keep my receipts from this invasion. So I am also collecting the evidence of what expenses I had to incur as a result of the invasion.
So basically, you suggest every Ukrainian citizen to do the same, basically to record everything they spent due to this invasion.
Absolutely. How many power banks do you actually need? Well, I had to buy 3. Do I need 3? Have I ever needed even 1? No. So. And things like that continue. I have 2 torches. Why would I ever need torches? No, I need them now because I don't have electricity at home. And every citizen has done that. And those things cost money. And as you go on, the amount just adds up. So in the end, I think it's right for the Russia to cover all those expenses as well to every citizen of Ukraine.
Yeah, so basically you mean that there is a way to extract that money from Russia because for now what's been, I believe, discussed not only in Ukraine or by initiative of Ukraine but in other countries as well is the idea of frozen and basically confiscating Russia's assets abroad, and that includes not only sometimes the state's assets or the central bank assets abroad, which are counted in billions, but also sometimes funds of wealthy Russians, at least connected with Kremlin, so-called oligarchs. So you really believe that it will be possible to maybe present that bill before the end of the war or only after? Should we, like you said, collect these receipts for every single piece of damage that has been done, for every, let's call it straight war crime that has been committed, that has its economic value, and present it now, or should we wait till the end of the war and do it then?
It is difficult to say what would be the best approach now, but I would suggest we look at the example of what happened in the past. And as I have already brought up, the example of UN Compensation Commission that was working for Iraq-Kuwait war, we could draw on that example and say that we come up with a total bill after the war. Just right after the war, we calculate all our damages. We come up with a total number. We give the evidence to the Compensation Commission that will be formed. And then the Compensation Commission will review the evidence and assign appropriate reparations. So in case of Iraq, obviously Iraq did not have immediately all the money to cover for the cost of invasion. But what we decided is that the substantial part of its oil revenue would go into gradually paying off this bill for the invasion. In case of Russia, indeed, as you rightfully mentioned, there are lots of assets that Russia still has abroad that are kept in bank accounts in other Western nations, and all the way to properties of Russian companies, state-owned companies, even privately held companies, Russian oligarchs. So yes, indeed, there are talks about mechanisms being put in place to confiscate those assets and to pass them over to pay the bills for the invasion. But this is a lengthy process. it won't happen overnight. And for that to happen, I'm not a lawyer, but my thinking would be that you actually need a centralized commission, compensation or reparations commission, that would oversee the whole process.
Okay, well, to be honest, I'm excited, and I like to hear things like paying from oil revenues for the compensation to Ukraine by Russia. That sounds as music to my ears, and I hope that it will happen eventually. You've already mentioned power banks that you've bought, flashlights and everything that you don't need, but we all understand why you need them right now. That's because of power outages. So Russia heavily targeted the energy infrastructure of Ukraine with its missile attacks, basically for the last, I believe, 3 months of 2022, and it did not stop in 2023, as we see, and we have no reason to believe that it will stop. The Prime Minister has already warned citizens that more power outages can be expected, more attacks to be expected. This brings a lot of inconvenience, of course, to ordinary citizens, but my question would be how it affects business operation in Ukraine.
It does have a very strong effect on the way businesses operate. So imagine you run a cafe, the lights go off. How do you operate? You can't cook any meals because your stove is not working. You can't accept card payments because you have no electricity. Because there is no electricity, water pumps are no longer working, so your employees cannot wash their hands. How is the cafe supposed to operate?
Yeah.
It's impossible. Businesses have been adapting. Most of them have bought generators that work on diesel or petroleum. According to there was a recent survey of businesses to estimate how many businesses have generators. And I think by the end of 2022, almost 50% of businesses in Ukraine have obtained generators. That's a lot.
It definitely explains me, going off to sleep and waking up from the buzzing sound of the generators in my neighborhood.
And the smog as well.
Yeah.
Yes, that happens. But there are also so apart from generators, there are also other tricks that businesses employ to continue working during blackouts. So for example, going back to the example of cafe, some of the cafes, they change their menu. So when the lights go off, usually for the period of 4 to 3 hours, they change their menu. They serve a reduced menu. For example, they switch hot meals to sandwiches, fruits and salads instead of main courses.
Yeah, like a blackout menu, right?
Yeah. Most of the places have blackout menus. Then office workers, they either tend to go to the co-working spaces or work from cafes and restaurants which have generators. That way you can continue doing your job without being affected by power cuts.
Yeah, as our listeners would know, that's exactly my way of doing, and exactly the way we were able to continue with the podcast. Sometimes starting early in the cafe nearby, where they have the generator and the internet connection when there is none at home. Yeah. So I do know that.
Yeah.
Everyone is adapting as best as they can, but you've already mentioned like 50% of businesses have these generators. So does it mean that like for the most of the day others are not operating? What are the prospects here? What to expect? Like, will they be, I don't know, closing down, or do they, I don't know, work only those hours when they can and go home otherwise, or how it works?
Well, it depends on the business. Some businesses do share generators, for example. Others change their working hours to adapt to the blackout schedule. Others prefer to work during the night because the electricity supply is more stable during the night. So there are various changes the businesses have made in order to adapt to this situation, and overall, it's great to see that people are managing to sustain operations. They're not yielding to these terrorist attacks by the Russians. on the grid infrastructure. They are not afraid of it, and they are not panicking about it. However, there is one unpleasant consequence of this because now there is extra pressure on businesses when it comes to electricity. They have to buy generators and they have to get the electricity out of them, so they need to buy diesel. Electricity becomes more expensive for them. It's 5 times more expensive to get electricity from generator than from the grid.
And plus you have to basically pay for the generator itself, so it's also a capital investment, right? And sometimes they cost a lot.
Absolutely. As a result, this cost is eventually being passed on to the consumer, so it feeds into the overall inflation in the country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I will 100% agree with you on how beautiful the resilience of Ukrainians look like, because nobody is thinking about that lack of electricity can break people, and we have to give up because we don't have the electricity. So on contrary, people are just finding ways to continue operating, continue working, studying. I've seen especially in the first months when the blackout started in the cafe, which I already mentioned. So dozens of people coming in, like I said, studying, working, tutoring someone, having, I believe, even interviews, job interviews in the cafe. So it looked, of course, a bit stressful, but at the same time beautiful, seeing, people responding to it as they probably should, with just determination to go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you on that. But, I've heard, at least recently, that Ukraine has started to import electricity from the EU, and that basically I may not use the correct word in here, but we connected our power grids. Can it help in any way? For example, Russia targets power generator facilities in Ukraine, and we just get this electricity from neighboring Poland or neighboring Hungary or Slovakia. Can it be the way to get more electricity and thus don't have so many power outages?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've heard many opinions, and so I'm not an expert on electricity, but based on what I know, I can say, can it help? Yes and no. So the Russians, predominantly, they try to target grid infrastructure. So in Kyiv, they destroyed power transformators, those units that deliver power to the end users by reducing the voltage. Mm-hmm. Also, they target power generation capacity, so they hit a couple of gas power stations or coal power stations and the hydropower stations. Yes, there is a lack of generation capacity, but it's worth mentioning that 2 of Ukraine's nuclear power plants are not working at their capacity. We ourselves can increase generation capacity. The problem here is that how do we get this extra output to the consumer in the area where it is needed? Because the Russians are damaging infrastructure, that is incredibly challenging. Importing electricity from the European Union can help, but it will help to help only the regions who are neighboring with the European Union.
Understood. So let's hope it won't be as much of a problem in the future. At least we see that winter has been very mild so far, and we are told that it affects the generation capacity. So the warmer it is outside, the less power outages we tend to have. At least that's what I see. That's the tendency. But also what we understand with this current weather, when it's where it's quite warm, that we don't have to use as much coal, as much gas to warm up the cities for central heating. So my question would be, do we have enough of this gas to go on through the winter? Because even though this is quite a warm winter and we are really lucky with it, but still there are sometimes periods when we have minus 10 degrees Celsius and sometimes even lower, and we don't know what to be expected because, well, it's only only middle of the winter. So do we have enough gas to go on?
Well, as you rightfully mentioned, I think we've been very, very lucky with the weather so far. It's been untypically mild. And the New Year's Eve was, I think we had plus 12 degrees Celsius on the New Year's Eve. I can't remember last time it was so warm.
Yeah, that's probably, I agree with you, that's probably where global warming is working in our favor, this rare occasion.
Yeah, true,
right?
true. And it's helping us both with electricity and gas, because if it's colder, then the lower temperatures, they tend to increase consumption of electricity, and then more pressure is being applied on the grid. So you might actually say that when spring comes, temperatures rise, and then we won't have problems with the grid. Well, that's not the case. So we will still have power cuts. And I think recently DTEC has explained that because when the temperatures rise and spring starts, actually scheduled maintenance of the grid kicks in. So they will have to run repairs on the grid in order to maintain its stability. Therefore, the capacity of the grid to transport as much power as needed will be reduced, despite the fact that we are not suffering from lower temperatures. So overall, the fact that the blackouts will persist throughout spring and maybe even summer. When you were asking about gas, the last message I've seen as of November 2022, I believe, there was a report by the state entity saying that we have 14.7 billion cubic meters in the gas storages, out of which there are about 11 billion cubic meters that belongs to Naftogaz, which is a state company. Interestingly, in summer, the government has done its own crisis assessment, and it was decided that in order to survive the winter, Ukraine needs roughly 19 billion cubic meters of gas in its storages. So essentially, we are now short about 4.5 billion cubic meters in storages from what the government said it needs. Now, it's difficult to estimate what consumption looks right now because all the forecasts have been classified.
But probably they were not expecting such a mild winter.
Absolutely. And the fact that the industry, we have such a strong GDP decline, industry is consuming less gas. Therefore, I would say 14 billion cubic meters should be enough. And I've seen interviews with many experts, with many gas experts. They say about 14, 15 billion cubic meters should suffice for the winter. So overall, I think we are fine for this winter. The weather has been on our side, which is good news. But it's time for us to start thinking about the next heating season.
Another Russian propaganda myth debunked here, I believe. They were saying that basically with this war and everything's going on around sanctioning Russia, the whole Europe will freeze. So as we can see, halfway through winter and halfway through heating season, we are not going to freeze. And like you said, Ivan, probably we won't freeze at least this year. So let's keep it this way. And let's keep it this way into the next year as well.
If you enjoyed this new segment, let us know at our email, HighlightsFromUkraine, all one word, @gmail.com. Send us ideas for new topics as well.
As we've entered the 2023, what we can expect from this year economy-wise, what will be the key trends? So one you already mentioned, we need to buy gas for the next heating season. For that, we need external funding. What else?
Yeah, so overall, it is reasonable to expect stabilization of economy in Ukraine for the next year, for this 2023, and even a mild recovery. However, it's subject to the severity of power cuts that happen across the country. If I were to summarize Ukraine's economy in 2023, I would say three words. It's poultry, grain, and Java. What do I mean? Basically, the key locomotives of our export were metals and mining plus grain. Because of the Russian blockade of the seaports, plus the invasion from the east, when the industrial areas are completely destroyed in the east, we are now left with only one main source of export revenue, which is grain. And those exports will be the key to our export foreign currency revenues going next year. They will sustain because we still have this grain deal with Turkey, UN, and Russia. So that's good news.
Hopefully that will continue and we will still be able to go on with that.
Correct. Poultry industry have had a reasonable year. So the poultry sector has suffered at the beginning of the invasion when Russians hit Kherson. So the poultry manufacturers have sustained a couple of damages. So mainly there was a large chicken farm in the Kherson region that belonged to the company called Avantgarde. I think the Russians shelled it and killed 4.4 million chickens.
Oh my!
Yeah. Plus, they also shelled a warehouse of one of the largest producers, MHP. However, those damages did not bring down the industry. The industry has recovered promptly. They switched the way they operate. They use more generators. They switched to working during night shifts. So they've showed quite a lot of resilience. And as a result, in terms of export revenue, they sustained their revenues this year, well, compared to 2021. Thanks to the increased prices for eggs and poultry, yes, that contributed a lot. But overall, I think this industry did a good job to adapt to the new environment and sustain itself. So going forward, they are well placed for the next year, especially thanks to the liberalization of trade between Ukraine and Western countries. Now all the products can flow freely across the border. The only challenge is logistics. How do you deliver it?
Yeah, but still, open borders. Thank you, EU. Thank you, Western partners. It's always welcomed.
Absolutely. And thank you, the UK as well. Absolutely. And Java. So why Java? So IT exports, IT services will be growing. Why? Because first of all, because our IT offices have now enough generators to keep the power, to keep the lights on, and Starlinks to be connected 24/7, which means that any blackouts will not affect the operations. So we'll continue to be on the world market as a reliable provider of software as a service, platform as a service, development, testing, and other services. And IT revenue will be growing.
Okay. So these are the spheres that we expect growth. I should say honestly, you've painted here quite a positive and quite positive picture, and I would love, just to put a full stop here and not to continue, but I just have to, because I've seen these reports and these assessments last year that Ukraine needs quite a heavy support from outside, quite a heavy support with external funding. I believe it was the financial ministry that assessed that Ukraine needs $3.5 billion per month to pay the bills. So we see foreign states and organizations, they've planned last year regular financing for Ukraine. Probably the most visible example would be the EU, that they alone envisaged 18 billion euros for 2023 for Ukraine. And I believe this week we've already received the first 3 billions out of this sum. We understand that war is not cheap, not considering paying for the military itself, but also for the economy, what you already told us. But will Ukraine get the support it needs? Has enough funds been promised already and delivered? Because last year I've heard that there was a problem that, demand for money in Ukraine was higher than the funds provided to it.
In terms of how much money has been promised already, is it enough? Well, in terms of the money promised, yes, plenty. In terms of the money delivered, well, it's nowhere near enough.
Thank you, partners again. Thank you, partners again. At least with promises, but hopefully they will fulfill it, right?
Yeah, well, if you look back in the first 6 months, the pledges for money, they were quite chaotic. Countries, institutions would pledge this much, that much. There was no coordination. But recently, all the donors, international donors, they have started doing more coordination in terms of the assistance that they provide. And they plan regular meetings to coordinate this assistance. So as a result, you have this package for 2023 when the EU has committed 18 billion euros and the US has committed $18 billion. Plus, there will be assistance from international agencies such as IMF and the likes. So there will be funds flowing. The only thing is there are conditions attached to these funds. For example, appointment of the new director of National Anti-Corruption Bureau is one of the conditions. Other conditions include continuing justice reforms, appointing this high judiciary council, and many other conditions that require Ukraine to continue its path towards reforms. So the money, the flow of money will be dependent on how rigorously the government of Ukraine adheres to its reforms agenda despite the war. Will the funding be cut if the government doesn't adhere to the reforms agenda? No, I don't think so.
So basically, you mean that if Ukraine doesn't fulfill these reforms or like changes that is expected of it, still the money will flow in and no need to worry about it?
No, I think our international partners all understand what situation we are in, and that this assistance of $36 billion to Ukraine is not something that we would like to have. It's something we desperately need to have.
Oh, okay.
It's the bare minimum that we need to sustain ourselves going forward, because there is a massive fiscal hole in our budget as a result of the war. So I would hope our partners do not back down on this particular promise, and instead would it be really helpful if the partners were to offer some extra candies. So increase this assistance in exchange for reforms. That would be more productive.
So you mean like this 36 billion, like have it and forget about it, but we have like extra couple billions for you if you do this, extra couple billions if you do that, and like so something like this, like reward system.
No, it's not the right attitude that 36 billion is have it and forget it. It's not the right attitude. It's the essential investment that is needed to help us sustain this aggression, because ultimately this is not just a donation for the Western countries. This is an investment into prosperity and stability, into peace on the continent going forward. So you can't treat it as a gift. It's not a gift, it's an investment. And it's a very profitable investment for the Western countries, and it should be treated as such.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, if you have a very profitable investment opportunity, such as this one, it makes absolute perfect sense to put a little bit more extra cash on the table and have it generate extra returns. And it definitely will.
Okay, so you already mentioned said that this is an investment in security. From this comes my next question. What all this help will be spent on? It will support the army, or, I don't know, help rebuild the lands that have been liberated, or maybe, I don't know, healthcare services, what it covers?
So as I mentioned, the $36 billion pledged for this year, it's the bare minimum that will be used to address the fiscal needs of the government. So what are those fiscal needs? That's the hole that appeared in the budget as a result of new needs which arise from the invasion, plus under collection of tax revenues because of the GDP falling about 35% or something. So what are those needs? Of course, financing the armed forces is one of those needs. Paying the soldiers' salaries is one of those needs, which is very important.
Yeah.
Paying for emergency reconstructions, making transfers to the local budget to support the internally displaced people who are not able to contribute to the budget because they don't have a job, they can't sustain themselves, and they need the support. Finally, constant missile strikes deliver damages to the infrastructure. So the money will be used to repair this infrastructure, to sustain country's economy and help it survive through the shocks of the Russian missile strikes. So to conclude, it's primarily two directions: to plug the fiscal hole in the budget and do emergency repairs.
Enjoy early access and extended versions of Long Talk interviews on our Patreon by following the link in the description to this episode. Plus, this is the easiest way to support us.
We will need to soon wrap up, but before that, a final topic I would like to touch today is the reconstruction of Ukraine. It's been mentioned many times, I believe, basically since the war started itself. So we started to discuss the reconstruction right after the first villages were liberated in the north of the Kyiv region, and we continue to talk about it till now, and I believe we'll continue to talk about it for years to come, because that will be definitely a length process. So there were several conferences, experts meetings on how to approach this complicated task, develop a new Marshall Plan, reminiscent on that from the World War II, or create a reconstruction fund and fill it with the money confiscated from Russia abroad. You've already mentioned the idea of basically, presenting a bill to a receipt to Russia for all damage that it's done. But has Ukraine, let's say official Ukraine, like the state, the representatives of Ukraine, decided on which way to follow, or Ukraine right now tries to implement several approaches?
It's a complicated topic. There's been many, many developments on that front. But to summarize these developments, maybe I'll start with the first time the Ukrainian government has presented its vision for the reconstruction was during the Lugano conference in July. Back then, Ukraine presented its draft, which is called National Recovery Plan. It had hundreds of projects worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It's believed that it was done in the consultation with civil society, local governments, business associations, but there's been quite a lot of criticism about this process being very sporadic, hectic, very short-timed, so it was only 1 month long consultations. Mm-hmm. And generally, there was quite a lot of, I've heard various mixed feedback about the way the plan was presented and everything. But since then, I think the government has made some changes to its strategy, how they are addressing it, the reconstruction question, and what they will be asking. So as a result, the second time when there was an event dedicated to reconstruction, it was in Berlin in October, on the 25th of October, if I'm not mistaken. There was an event in Berlin. Then the Ukrainian government presented more structured, more staged approach to how the aid should be received. So then they highlighted this initial stage. While the war persists, there is a need for funding. And that's where we have this number of $38 billion coming from. That's what the Ukrainian government officials said, that we need to sustain the fighting throughout the 2023. Mm-hmm. Then comes the second stage, when the hostilities end, and it will last for the first 2 years. and primarily it will be financing of projects such as rebuilding housing, infrastructure, grid, and transport to connect the country and to help house the people, internally displaced people. So many people put different price tag on that. I would avoid putting price tag on that yet because the war is still not over and we don't know how much that will cost. Then will come the third and final stage of this reconstruction plan, which would look something like this well-known and a lot spoken about Marshall Plan. I like the way Boris Johnson describes this type of plans as "Build Back Better."
Yeah, we hope for that for sure.
Yeah, this is the most extensive stage. It can last for decades, and there are multiple assessments of how much money Ukraine would need. And again, I would steer away from putting the price tag here now, just because there is no point in doing so. The only thing I would like to say here is that this is the most important stage at which Ukraine really needs to focus on building a greener ecosystem, green economy, and helping the businesses of the country to transition to new environmental standards of the European Union and its regulations. So that is the only way we can build back better, a more prosperous and competitive economy. But what I'm really worried about is that we might just end up building a couple of hydrogen power plants and call it well done for the low carbon economy. And that would be a tremendous mistake. So a very, very big thought needs to put into the way how we structure this third phase, which is rebuilding the economy, investing in it, transitioning to a new environment where we need to follow closely what the climate change obligations are for the European Union and for ourselves. Also, I would like to say that the funds for this may come from various sources. It could be from the reparations from the Russians, as well as from donations from the Western nations. So it really depends on the arrangements at the time, and we are not at that stage yet. So it's no point in speculating. But what's really important is that all of these donations, finances, and reparations need to be supplemented by foreign direct investments. Mm. If we have foreign investments, then whatever money is being pledged or repatriated to us, it will be multiplied.
So, Ivan, I really like the picture you've painted here of presenting this whole horrible destruction and, as we understand, this a tragedy for Ukraine, or this war, this unfair invasion and unjustifiable invasion by Russia, as sort of an opportunity. This is quite a fresh and optimistic look into it for Ukraine to, how you said, quoting Boris Johnson, build back better. So let's hope that it will exactly happen like that, and that Ukraine will use this opportunity, that we will get the support from other states, and that we will for sure present that receipt to Russia that will pay for it. So thank you, Ivan, for stepping by, for sharing your thoughts on this. It's been real fun to talk to you, and a lot of insights that I've got here, and I hope all our listeners got as well. Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
It's me, Artem. Hope you enjoyed our talk with Ivan as much as I did. Thank you for listening to the new segment called Highlights from Ukraine Long Talk. Let us know via email highlightsfromukraine@gmail.com if you like these larger formats and what topics you would like us to cover next. By the way, you can get in touch with Ivan on Twitter. More details are in the notes to this episode. You can also find their information on how to support our team via Patreon or PayPal.